Discussions of modern textual criticism often focus on subtraction. Readers are asked to release familiar, late additions found in the Textus Receptus, passages like the Comma Johanneum or the longer ending of Mark 16. This process relies on the physical examination of evidence, looking at how the words on the page changed as they were copied over the centuries. We are looking at a specific set of variants where this pattern reverses. In these instances, the modern critical text reads with more doctrinal weight than the King James tradition. In 3 different books, the oldest Greek manuscripts, the 2nd century papyri and the great 4th century uncials, preserve a more startling Christology than the later Byzantine tradition. Applying rigorous criticism to these verses provides an opportunity to see the deity of Christ as the earliest authors expressed it. We are examining how the manuscript record, when read carefully, returns these doctrines to us in their strongest form. You can see these differences in modern translations. In John 1:18, the King James reads, "the only begotten Son," while the ESV reads, "the only God." At 1 Timothy 3:16, the King James has, "God was manifest," while modern translations read, "he was manifested." In Acts 20:28, the difference is more subtle. While English Bibles generally agree on the phrase Church of God, the underlying Greek manuscripts diverge on the logic of the verse, specifically the reference to God's own blood. These translation differences are the visible results of a divergence in the Greek manuscript families that took place between the 2nd and 5th centuries. To understand what the apostles actually wrote, we have to look past the English and weigh the physical Greek evidence. We can evaluate these differences using the harder reading canon. This principle recognizes that ancient scribes were more likely to ease a difficult or unusual reading than to invent one. In John 1:18, the Byzantine Greek tradition provides the familiar reading monogenes huios, only begotten Son. This scale shows how the evidence is distributed. On one side, the oldest papyri, dating back to roughly the year 200, read monogenes theos, the only God. Only begotten Son is a comfortable, standard phrase in the Gospel of John. A scribe encountering it would see a familiar pattern. Only begotten God is a jarring theological paradox. It is an unusual combination of words that a scribe would be unlikely to introduce into a text. The most likely explanation is that the startling reading, "the only God," is original. The later shift to Son represents a natural human instinct to smooth the text into something more familiar. We see this same dynamic at Miletus, during Paul's final address to the Ephesian elders. The oldest Greek reading of Acts 20:28 describes the Church of God, which he obtained with his own blood. This creates a theological knot. God, in his divine nature, does not have blood. That belongs to the humanity of Christ. Theology addresses this through the communication of attributes. Because Christ is one person with 2 natures, what belongs to his human nature can be predicated to his divine person. The blood is Christ's, but the person who shed it is God. Later scribes, uncomfortable with the tension of God's blood, smoothed the reading. They changed the text to Church of the Lord, or combined the two into Church of the Lord and God. The apostolic text carried a high paradoxical Christology that later copyists eventually found too difficult to maintain. At 1 Timothy 3:16, the textual shift was likely mechanical. The Byzantine tradition reads, "God was manifested," but the earlier manuscripts read, "who was manifested," which opens an ancient rhythmic hymn. Early scribes used sacred names, or nomina sacra. They abbreviated certain words, like God or Lord, to save space and mark them as holy. This typographic breakdown shows the original Greek word for who. It is written as 2 letters, omicron and sigma, OC. The abbreviation for God is theta sigma with a line over the top. To change who into God, a scribe only had to add a single horizontal stroke through the middle of the O and a line above it. If the original text read God, it is difficult to imagine a scribe removing those strokes to create a more difficult, unattached relative pronoun. In actual manuscripts like Codex Sinaiticus, we can physically see these later strokes. A corrector's ink was added on top of the original author's OC, centuries after the manuscript was first written. The reading, "God was manifested," is the result of a mechanically trivial correction that simplified the grammar and sharpened the doctrinal statement. This timeline charts the altitude of these variants. In all three cases, the earlier manuscripts present a sharper, more complex witness than the later Byzantine tradition. Some scholars have argued that early scribes deliberately injected higher Christology into the text to combat various heresies. The patterns in these manuscripts suggest a different dynamic. Scribes encountered original apostolic paradoxes and attempted to make them intelligible through the process of smoothing. Relying on the oldest manuscripts returns us to a high Christology, reflecting the language of the apostles before later traditions carried it. Accepting the older readings in these verses does not put the deity of Christ at risk. This doctrine is taught on textually undisputed ground throughout the New Testament. The Word was God, all the fullness of God, my Lord and my God. These undisputed verses form the foundation of the creeds and confessions that have guided the Church for 2,000 years. The discipline of textual criticism serves this foundation. By weighing the evidence, we move past centuries of scribal smoothing to receive the high, unedited Christology that the apostles actually wrote.